think both of you think it's a lot more complicated than that, and perhaps we'll just start with you, Tim, because when you talk about your experiences with it, you do report times where you have felt like you were walking on air, etc. But it seems that in the long run, sort of, you certainly don't think that adopting sort of Zen practices is any straightforward route to happiness in any straightforward way. What is the connection between? How has your view of happiness changed?
Well, I mean, no, I don't believe in it. And I don't mean that in the sense that I don't believe it in the way that I hear Buddhists talk about it, that they walk around on a cloud all day long. I don't believe it. I think human beings suffer, and I think the Buddha made a similar point. Life involves suffering. There's no way around it, and I think that's a realistic way of looking at life. You're not going to escape pain. The question is, are you going to add on to your pain? Are you going to pay interest on a debt that no one is due? And what I see in people, when I see people suffering, largely I see them suffering over things they need not suffer. Now, if one of my daughters, God forbid, was hurt in an accident, I would suffer, and if I didn't suffer, I would consider myself human. And if I just thought, oh, that's okay, it's just, that's sick. And we're all going to go through suffering. It's the human condition. And I don't think anybody who... So the answer to your question is, I believe I think what's central to Buddhism, one of the essential ideas is the idea of mutual arising, that things only arise on account of their opposites. And happiness is like that. There's no happiness. There's something called happiness-unhappiness, which operates across a spectrum. And if you didn't know what unhappiness was, you would have no idea what happiness was. And therefore, they are mutually interdependent. And that's true of everything. And that's why, again, it's not like the scientific view, which divides everything up into separate chunks. Everything relates to everything else. And out of that, you have a wholeness. And that includes pain and suffering and good and evil, and happiness and sadness. They all operate together. They all rely on each other. They produce dynamism in the system through being opposed to each other. But they are necessary for each other. So we are not trying to get rid of evil. We are accepting the fact that we have to have evil in order to have good. And it's quite challenging from a moral point of view. But I think it's much more realistic in the idea that we must constantly be fighting to destroy evil in the world, because we're not having much luck here.
In your book you go into so much detail about this and how the very notion of happiness is extremely complicated. You actually have to sort of delineate all the different things we could mean by it and analyse them. And I do recommend people read the book and get that. So perhaps there isn't a lot of time to go into that. But perhaps at one point, just to say the last thing before we take some contributions from the audience. People will often, I've heard or read that there is research to show that Buddhism makes you happier, kind of thing. And I think you have some interesting things to say about that, and perhaps just one or two of them now.
Good. So I'm actually not. So I was there at the beginning of some people who were doing a lot of these studies on the effects of meditation. I was paying a lot of attention to it, and some of it was oversold and hyperbolic. But I do think that that I have a practice, actually. I do meditation myself, and there are a lot of things that it's helped me to do. I can go to whenever I go to the doctor, I can tell the doctor within a couple of points what my blood pressure will be, and I can always keep it very low if I feel like it. And that people do that back in the 1970s. That there are meditative techniques to keep oneself in cardiovascular sort of serenity, and those are very useful. And you keep cortisol levels down, things like that. Cortisol is called NK, natural killer. The modern world makes it buzz up all the time in our bodies. But now happiness, a lot of the handlers of the Dalai Lama, actually, his friends and many of whom I know, thought, oh my God, he's just turning into another snake oil salesman because he's selling Buddhism, giving you happiness. If you read the book carefully, I think he, for example, does have the right perspective. It's not at least happiness in the happy, what I call the happy, joy, click your heel American sense. Okay? It's not, it is something like well-being. or having a sense of meaning and purpose in your life, and being a person who's committed to the well-being of other people. If you think about happiness, happiness is overrated. If we think about the great people like Nelson Mandela, Mother Teresa, Gandhi, Jesus, Socrates, Buddha, Confucius, if you ask, are they happy? The answer isn't obviously yes. It's not the first thing that would come to mind for most of those people. But if we think that they're excellent people, we think it has something to do with the overall quality of their lives, something to do with the overall quality of their purposes and their commitments and the agenda that they have. And I think that Buddhism does have a lot to say about that. As for happiness in the hedonic sense, not much. Thank you.
Yeah, that's interesting actually. What we did make, the meditation research is all very well, but it's actually about the effects of meditation, not about being a Buddhist.
Yeah.
But also like your point about these great people. I imagine when the angel Gabriel came to Mary and said, "You shall have a son, and he shall be the Lord of all people." She didn't turn around and say, "Well, as long as he's happy." There won't be further. Anyway, so let's take some.